All right, this is the copyright disclaimer. Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, education, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. And this video is not for any monetary gain. It is explicitly for the reasons stipulated in the Copyright Act of 1976 under Section 107.
Did you know that in 1863, a mob of white adults hunted down toddlers in the streets of New York City? The Colored Orphan Asylum on Fifth Avenue housed over 200 black children, ages 2 to 12. They thought they were safe behind those walls. On July 13th, during the draft riots, an angry crowd marched toward the building. They carried clubs and torches, chanting slurs, heading straight for defenseless children. The mob surrounded the asylum and set it ablaze while kids were still trapped inside. When firefighters arrived, they refused to help. They watched black children burn. Some orphans escaped through back windows, but the crowd was waiting. Adults with weapons chased toddlers through the streets, beating them with sticks and stones. The youngest victims couldn't even run fast enough to get away. Multiple children died in the flames. Others were killed in the streets by grown men. This attack became the blueprint for racial terror targeting black youth across America. The children never had a chance.
They like to call it a riot, but let's be real. In 1863, New York turned into a 4-day lynch mob. White men burning, looting, and killing black people in the streets. All because they didn't want to fight in a war to end slavery. So here's what set it off, right? Lincoln's Union Army was bleeding men in the Civil War. So Congress passed a draft. But here was the fine print, right? If you were rich, you could pay $300 to dodge it. $300 back then is like 10 grand today. So who got drafted? The working poor, of course. Next up on the expendables list. And a lot of those poor men were Irish immigrants. And instead of directing their anger at the rich who bought their way out, they turned it on the one group with even less power. Black New Yorkers. Because in their minds, they were being forced to die for black freedom, all while fighting for scraps in the job market. And then it exploded. White mobs stormed through Manhattan. They looted stores, burned the draft office. But the real terror was that they hunted black people. They lynched men in broad daylight. They beat children to death. They set the Colored Orphan Asylum, home to over 200 black kids, on fire. The kids barely escaped, but the building was gone. Black dock workers were murdered, all because white longshoremen didn't want to compete with them. Families were dragged from their homes. Some were strung up on lampposts. This wasn't random chaos. It was targeted racial terror. And by the time federal troops fresh from Gettysburg rolled into the city, at least 120 people were dead. Most of them were black. Thousands more fled Manhattan for good. Entire black neighborhoods were emptied. And here's the sickest part. New York's black population never recovered. By 1865, the city had half as many black residents as it did before the massacres. Families who had been building lives for generations were just wiped out in a single week of white rage. So don't just call it a draft riot. These were poor whites proving that even when crushed by the same system, they'd rather kill their black neighbors than fight their oppressors. And the city that now calls itself progressive, it was built on the bones left behind in 1863.
This is the book of Obadiah, chapter 1, verse 10, and it reads, For thy violence against thy brother Jacob, shame shall cover thee, and thou shalt be cut off forever. Giving all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rahakakodash. Double honor to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone who rule well in teaching me this 100% truth. Salutations to them and my fellow Akim who labor in this truth week in and week out on the highways and byways. Also, salutations to the hopeful elect of the scattered 12 tribes of Israel, scattered to the four corners of the earth, that be like unto the speckled bird, also known as your Israelite foreigners, and your so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. To you, I say Shalom. This is your brother Ayashar Barazal, a prophet of doom from the Indianapolis branch of the Great Millstone, coming back at you with another lesson that is edifying to the elect body of the nation of Israel. All right, this is another installment of our camp series called For Thy Violence Against Thy Brother Jacob. Today I'm going to be dealing with the 1863 New York draft riots, which are pretty much centered around uh, the people of New York, and particularly so-called Edomites. Well, not so-called Edomites, but Edomites, who are the so-called white man, going ballistic because they had to fight in the war for the slaves, which the slaves themselves could not participate in. All right. And they pretty much took it out on Jake. And there was a couple of clips at the beginning. The one with the Israelite sister, she was saying that these Irish folks, rather than fight against their oppressors, they chose to fight against the defenseless Israelites, the so-called black people who were in slavery. All right. Well, what you have to understand is that those Irish folks, you know, even though they're at the bottom rung of the Edomites, they are still Edomites, okay? And getting rid of us at that time ensured that we would never get up over them after slavery occurred. But also, you need to know, just like the tiny hats over in the state of Israel have stolen our identity. They're not innocent of that same action when it comes to identity theft. This is an article uh, from the Irish Times. I'll put a link of it in the description box. It's a totally different lesson, but just want you to know that they're not the original Irish. Let's just put it that way. And it's titled "Early Irish People Were Dark Skinned with Blue Eyes" documentary. It's a whole article on this. You can type that in. Just ask them the question. It'll bring up a bunch of articles. This one is from the Irish Times, and along with the article for the New York riots. I'll put this one in the description box as well too. All right. So just so you know, they are the same people, elite or non-elite, Edomites at the end of the day, and they have that perpetual hatred for Jake. All right. So this is the article, and that opening scripture, Obadiah 1 and 10. For thy violence against thy brother Jacob, um, shame shall cover thee, and thou shalt be cut off forever. So pretty much this whole book, Obadiah, is an indictment against Esau Edom for everything that he has done to us um, to this very day, even as I speak. All right. And like I said, his shame is starting to cover him because all of his history, has come out. The world knows exactly who the Edomites are. You called yourselves white, with that word white means without moral impurity. And we know damn well your history, that's not the case with your history. There's nothing morally pure about you, okay, about your nation. All right. You're the devil that has destroyed many peoples, many lands, and the whole earth. You're trying to anyway. All right. It says, "A shame shall cover you." Again, that's because of your history, and thou shalt be cut off forever. So there's going to come a point in time, which the clock is already ticking on this prophecy, that you will be going into slavery. All right. And after that slavery is over, uh, you're going to be rounded up and destroyed. That's in verse 18 of the same book. All right. So without further ado, Book of Obadiah. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the article. It's from history.com. And like I said, I'll put a copy, a link to this article in the description box of the video. All right. Here's your table of contents. New York City divided pre-Civil War. New federal draft law sparks unrest. Riots begin. Riots cause violence and bloodshed. How the draft riots ended. The aftermath and legacy. All right. It says the New York draft riots occurred in July 1863 when the anger of working class New Yorkers over a new federal draft law during the Civil War sparked 5 days of some of the bloodiest and most destructive rioting in U.S. history. And, this Jake was a target. Jake didn't make that call. You were still slaves in 1863. All right. It says hundreds of people were killed, many more seriously injured, and black New Yorkers were often the target of the rioters' violence. Okay. Says New York City divided pre Civil War. As a business capital of the nation, New York City had not welcomed the onset of Civil War as it meant losing the South as an important trading partners. It's all about money. Okay. If they can't make money off of Jake, they're going to destroy you. And that's, man, what's that? This is Sirach 13. All right, verse 4 says, If thou be for his profit, he will use thee. But if thou have nothing, he will forsake thee. So yeah, they're about to lose that money based on slavery. Okay, all right. So that's what Esau's about, man. If they can't make money off of Jake, they don't want shit to do with you. All right. Back to the article, and we see that. You can see that in the music and the entertainment industry today. It says cotton was an extremely valuable product for New York's merchants. Before the Civil War, cotton represented 40% of all the goods shipped out of the city's port. And long after the slavery trade was made illegal in 1808, the city's underground market and enslaved people continued to thrive. And it makes you wonder, when that orchestrated demolition of the Twin Towers happened in 2001, it was said that coffins were found under under there, and the slaves were the first commodity on the New York Stock Exchange. So all of this is coming together now. All right. It says when the Civil War broke out in 1861, there was even talk of New York succeeding from the Union itself. So entwined were the city's business interests with the Confederate States. See, yeah, fuck that North and South shit, man. It's the whole nation of Edom. All right, yin and yang. Same thing as Republican and Democrat. You know, two wings of the same damn buzzard. Point blank. Period. All right. It says as the war progressed, New York's anti-war politicians and newspapers kept warning its working-class white citizens, many of them Irish or German immigrants, that emancipation would mean their replacement in the labor force by thousands of freed enslaved people from the South. And that within itself is some bullshit. If you go into the etymology of the word emancipate, it means transfer of ownership. All right. So this war broke out in 1861. The Emancipation Proclamation passed Congress January 1st, 1863. All right. And the most ignorant of our people, were looking for Juneteenth to be a holiday. Texas dragged their feet for another 2.5 years. Okay, June 19th, 1865. All right, the last state to go with the Emancipation Proclamation. All right, so while that was happening, you go through the history, The 13th Amendment was making its way through Congress. Okay. And it was ratified. As a matter of fact, the anniversary was just this past Saturday, December 6th, 1865. Okay. So while it was making its way through Congress, um, which, 13th Amendment, slavery was abolished unless you became a felon. Um, from the time of January 1st, 1863, up until the point Texas was the last one to ratify it, and a couple 2.5 years later, they were taking all those black codes and changing them into laws so that Jake would become a felon and go right back to the plantation that they came from. You had loitering law, so you were, free from slavery. All right, and a bunch of Jakes are waiting, for a job opportunity. Well, the slave patrol cops could come up. You know, loitering was a felony. All right, threw you right back in jail, or if you didn't have your papers. You know, so it's a jacked up system. Meant to oppress us forever. And Jake is not understanding that when you keep believing in this government. All right. So continue on with the article. Other things that Jake really needs to look up. All right. It says in September of 1862, President Abraham Lincoln announced the Emancipation Proclamation. Okay, which would take effect early the following year, January 1st, 1863, confirming the workers' worst fears. Okay, so here it was. Now that propaganda is spreading. They're going to take your job. Same shit they're doing today. All right. And look at what's happened thus far. They're trying to reverse that with all the DEI stuff. When it's the DEI stuff that's really affecting them the most. All right. I just saw an article the other day. Enrollment is down among white males because of the rescindence of DEI. Yeah. So these curses are hitting them as well too, like it says in Deuteronomy 30:7. It says, at the time, Lincoln's decision for emancipation sparked protests among workers in the city, as well as soldiers and officers in New York regiments who had signed up to preserve the Union, not to abolish slavery. All right. It goes on. Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. Abraham Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation in this scene from the March to War. And you can click on that video at your leisure. I won't do it for copyright purposes. Okay. Like I said, it's nested within the article itself. It says, new federal draft law sparks unrest. Facing a dire shortage of manpower in early 1863, Lincoln's government passed a strict new conscription law, which made all male citizens between 20 and 35 and all unmarried men between 35 and 45 subject to military duty. What they're trying to do again right now. He says, though all eligible men were entered into a lottery, they could buy their way out of harm's way by hiring a substitute or paying $300 to the government, roughly $5,800 today. And this article was written in, just want to keep it in context, first published in 2009. So that amount, that $300 will be considerably more today. All right. It says at the time, that sum was the yearly salary for the average American worker, making avoiding the draft impossible for all but the wealthiest of men, which is the way it is today. Your current POTUS got out of the war, and now he's trying to send people to it. It says, compounding the issue, black men were exempt from the draft as they were not considered citizens. And we know that the 14th Amendment wasn't ratified until 1868. All right. 3 years after the slaves were freed. So you were just in limbo. from 1865 to 1868, which is how a lot of those black codes came into effect and threw right back on the uh, plantations under convict leasing, or I forget the name of the other thing that they were doing. Sharecropping. Yeah, that's what it was called. Okay. Back in the article, it says riots over the draft occurred in other cities, including Detroit and Boston, but nowhere as badly as in New York. Anti war newspapers published attacks on a new draft law, fueling the mounting anger of white workers leading up to the city's first draft lottery on July 11th, 1863. The riots began. For the first 24 hours after the lottery, the city remained suspiciously quiet, but rioting began early on the morning of Monday, July 13th. Thousands of white workers, mainly Irish and Irish Americans, started by attacking military and government buildings and became violent only toward people who had tried to stop them, including the insufficient number of policemen and the soldiers the city's leaders initially mustered to oppose them. By that afternoon, however, they had moved on to target black citizens, homes, and businesses. See, because there was no repercussion for it. Okay, that easy target. All right. It says in one notorious example, a mob of several thousand people, some armed with clubs and bats, stormed the colored orphan asylum on Fifth Avenue near 42nd Street, a four-story building housing more than 200 children, all children, defenseless. This is Esau all the way. What was he doing when we came out of Egypt? Okay. In particular, Amalek, coming from behind, attacking the feeble, the women, and the defenseless. All right. Fucking cowards, as they always have been throughout history. All right. It says, for they took bedding, food, clothing, and other goods and set fire to the orphanage, but stopped short of assaulting the children who were forced to go to one of the city's almshouses. And, that right there is suspect too, you know, because Esau has always had this sense that, if you spared a child, they would grow up and return the favor. So, yeah, I mean, I know what it says, but to me, that's suspect as well too. They believe they did take out some of those kids. It says riots caused violence and bloodshed. In addition to black people themselves, Israelites, rioters turned their rage against white abolitionists and women who were married to black men. Never went after, the people who were the cause of it. None of those folks call for that war. Okay, but that's how, and we saw that today. Okay, and most recently back in September, uh, uh, the dude from Turning Point, you know, assassinated, CK assassinated in broad daylight. What's the first a few things in the news? Two black men hung in Mississippi, and these people go to HBCUs, had absolutely nothing to do, but they're looking for any reason to justify getting rid of Jake. All right, anything, and that's why you Jake keep believing. There's hope for these people. That Psalms 53 says there's not one who is good, not one. So keep putting your trust in these folks in the government, man. They showing you their horns now. All right. Back into the article. It says riots cause violence and bloodshed. It says in addition to black people themselves, rioters turned their rage against white abolitionists and women who were married to black men. White dock workers long opposed black men working on the docks alongside them. A demonstration against employers hiring black workers on the docks had turned violent earlier in 1863, took the opportunity to destroy many of the businesses near the docks that catered to black workers and attack their owners as part of their effort to erase the black working class from the city. And man, that brings to mind You know, had nothing to do with it, but Jake was the target. It's Amos 1 and 11. And it reads, For thus saith Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai, for 3 transgressions of Edom, and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof. All right. So your punishment is coming, Esau, Edom, for stuff just like I just read. And why is that? He says, because he did pursue his brother with the sword. Okay. And we know the sword can be any instrument of extreme harm or death. Okay. And did cast off all pity. Not once did you consider these people had nothing to do with what was going on. They weren't even classified as citizens. But no, you took that opportunity to destroy everything, them and everything around them. All right. It says, and his anger did tear perpetually, which is continually nonstop, and he kept his wrath forever. Again, to this very day. This is what's happening. All right. Get back to the article. It says, by far, the worst violence was reserved for black men. Ironically, cut off the seed line. You know, you destroy the man, you destroy the nation because it's the nationality or the nation is determined by the man. All right. It says, by far, the worst violence was reserved for black men, a number of whom were lynched or beaten to death with shocking brutality. In all, the published death toll of the New York City draft riots was 119 people, though estimates of the actual number of people killed reached as high as 1,200. Okay. It says how the draft riots ended. It says New York leaders struggled with the task of containing the draft riots. Governor Horatio C. Moore was a peace Democrat who had openly opposed the draft law and appeared sympathetic to the riot. New York City's Republican mayor, George Opdyke, wired the War Department to send federal troops but hesitated on declaring martial law in response to the rioting. On July 15th, the third day of the protests, rioting spread to Brooklyn and Staten Island. The following day, the first of more than 4,000 federal troops arrived from New York regiments who had been fighting in the Battle of Gettysburg. After clashing with rioters in what is now the Murray Hill neighborhood, the troops were finally able to restore order, and by midnight of July 16th, the New York City draft riots had come to an end. All right, it's the aftermath and the legacy. It says, in addition to the death toll, the riots had caused millions of dollars in property damage and made some 3,000 of the city's black residents homeless. The New York draft riots remain the deadliest riots in U.S. history, even worse than the 1992 Los Angeles riots and the 1967 Detroit riots. It says when the Colored Orphan Asylum attempted to rebuild on the same site after the riots, neighboring property owners protested, and the orphanage would eventually be relocated to the sparsely settled area north of the city that would later become Harlem. Interesting. It says, stunned by the riots, the abolitionist movement in New York City revived itself slowly, and in March 1864, less than a year after the draft riots, New York City saw its first all black volunteer regiment in the Union Army march with pomp and circumstance through the streets before boarding their ship in the Hudson River. Slocky. Says, but despite this meaningful victory, the draft riots would have devastating impact on the city's black community. While the 1860 census recorded 12,414 black New Yorkers, by 1865, the city's black population had declined to 9,945 by 1865, the lowest number since 1820. All right, and here are the sources. That's the end of the article. And like I said, I'll put a link of it in the description box of the video. And likewise, um, a link to that article about the Irish, original Irish people uh, being so-called black people or Jakes. All right. So let's get a couple of closing scriptures, for this violence against us. This is Ezekiel chapter 25, again in verse 12. It says, "Thus saith Yahweh our power, because that Edom have dealt against the house of Judah by taking vengeance, and have greatly offended and revenged himself upon them. Therefore, thus saith Yahweh our power, I will also stretch out mine hand upon Edom, and will cut off man and beast from it, and I will make it desolate from Teman, and they of Dedan shall fall by the sword." Verse 14, "And I will lay my vengeance upon Edom by the hand of my people Israel, and they shall do in Edom according to mine anger and according to my fury, and they shall know my vengeance, saith Yahweh our power." All right. So that's coming back. You're gonna have to pay for everything that you did. All right. But there's an appointed time. But if you notice here, he said, "By the hand of my people Israel." See that when he says Israel, that's the time where we have come back uh, as a nation. You know, no more two kingdoms, no more two nations. All right, according to Ezekiel 37. You know, we're gonna come back together. And let you have it in the worst way. Manifest Destiny definitely has a part two, and it's going to be epic. All right. This is the book of Joel, chapter 3, verse 19. And it reads, Egypt, meaning a house of bondage, or the word Mizraim, meaning straits, our straits, okay? It says, Egypt shall be a desolation, and Edom shall be a desolate wilderness for the violence against the children of Judah, because they have shed innocent blood in their land. All right. And like I said, that was one of many of the worst cases. Those are New York riots of 1863. Okay. So verse 20. But Judah, the southern kingdom, shall dwell forever, and Jerusalem from generation to generation. All right. Dwelling from ever and dwelling from generation to generation. That means we already have the law, statutes, and commandments within us, and we have those bodies of immortality. Okay? That's what that means. Verse 21, it says, For I will cleanse their blood that I have not cleansed, for Yahweh Bashem Yahushai dwelleth in Zion. All right, now how is he going to cleanse the blood? This is the book of Numbers, chapter 35 and verse 33. All right, and it reads, So ye shall not pollute the land wherein ye are, for blood it defileth the land, and the land cannot be cleansed of the blood that is shed therein, but by the blood of him that shed it. Yeah, a lot of your blood is going to be shed, Esau, Edom, for what you did. You know, the Lord says that, you know, Isaiah 63, a lot of your blood is going to be shed for what you done. And you continue to do it. The chariots are up there, but you're still trying to move forward with your plan. All right. Blatantly, what does the scripture say in Psalms 10? The Most High is not at all in his thoughts. He created you. He gonna fuck you up too by the hand of his people. All right. Like I said, it's gonna be epic. All right. This is Revelation chapter 13. Again in verse 9. It says, if any man have an ear, let him hear. Any man with understanding, let him understand. Verse 10. It says, he that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. Okay. Who's had us in captivity for the longest? Esau, Edom. Ever since, we come out of the dark ages into the Renaissance period. And not only that, you know, throughout the scriptures, you had a hand in helping other nations bring us down too. That's what Obadiah chapter the next verse, 11. Obadiah 1 and 11 and 12. Yeah, yeah. You destroyed our temple, the first one, and the second one with the Romans. You got a lot of fucking shit to pay for, and we can't wait to get our hands on you. I say we humbly, because hopefully I'm of that number of the hopeful elect. But there are many, who have labored much longer, much harder, and more worthy. But man, I'd love to be a part of that. All right. And it says, he that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword. All right. So yeah, it's inevitable for you to get back what you did. Recompense. All right. Now we're gonna do it in righteousness. Won't be doing the foul stuff that you did, cutting babies out of the womb, buck breaking, all that stuff. But you're gonna have one hell of a punishment. And just to think, you're gonna have to deal with people who are returning to the godlike state they were in at the beginning. Can't die. You already weak now. All the stories we have done. If you did not outman or outgun Jake, you couldn't take him, even in his weakest form. You have to ask yourself, what are you going to do against men with God-like power? That's why you have to come down with great wrath now. But then you're in the trick bag, because those elect who are martyrs will be the first ones to rise, according to 1 Thessalonians 4. Those who died in Hamashiach first, who died in Hamashiach, they're going to rise first. And then those who are left behind, those who will be changed in the twinkling of an eye, yeah. What are you going to, that's something for you to really think about. The Lord is true. You know it. You seeing the signs in the sky. So you're going to have to go all out. But it's not going to mean nothing. All right? When it's all said and done. Yep. Yep. Y'all about to get rocked. For real. It says, here is the patience and the faith of the saints. Who are the saints? The Israelites. You can get that in Psalms 50 and 5, as well as Psalms 148 and 14. The saints are the Israelites. Okay? This is what it's all about. This is what it's coming to. All right? Our victory. After all the stuff you've done like this. All right? This is Sirach, chapter 10, verse 8. It says, because of unrighteous dealings, injuries, and riches got by deceit. That's explaining that whole article. Unrighteous dealing, you know, accusing us because of a law that we didn't make. Okay, riches, you know, that whole South being the customer because of the cotton picking. You mad about that? The injuries, what you did to us because of the declaration of civil war. All right. It says the kingdom is translated from one people to another. Yep. Clock is ticking on you, Esau, Edom, and it's running out fast. All right. So with that, I hope this lesson was edifying to the elect body of the nation of Israel. Once again, going to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rahakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone who rule well in teaching me this 100% truth. Salutations to them and my fellow Akim who labor in this truth week in and week out on the highways and byways. Also, salutations to the hopeful elect of the scattered 12 tribes of Israel, scattered to the four corners of the earth, that be like unto the speckled bird, also known as your Israelite foreigners and your so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. To you, I say Shalom, Kwam Yasharallah, Abba Babal. We got next. Shalom.